They didn't just laugh. They howled. The kind of laughter that makes your stomach turn and your face burn hot. I was standing by the office coffee machine pouring myself a cup when Brian from marketing leaned over and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So, Emma, sold any more of your little handmade trinkets lately? Or do you give them away for free with pity included?" The break room erupted. My cheeks felt like they were on fire. I forced a smile. "Actually, they're still sitting in your garage collecting dust?" Another voice cut in. It was Melissa, my department's self-proclaimed queen bee, who never missed an opportunity to put me down. She swirled her iced latte like she was stirring the pot, smirking. The laughter swelled again. Even Jacob, the quiet ET guy, chuckled behind his monitor. I wanted to tell them the truth, that my little side hustle wasn't just trinkets. They were hand-poured, small-batch soy candles, each one custom-scented, and people loved them. That I'd been selling steadily online for months. That I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. the night before fulfilling an order for a boutique in the city. But my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I stared at my coffee, wishing I could shrink down and disappear. That was the thing about this office. Once they decided you were a joke, the label stuck. They saw me as the girl with the silly hobby, and no amount of professionalism or hard work could rewrite the script in their heads. My title was project coordinator, but to them I was Emma, the candle girl. It would have been easier to let it roll off my back if I didn't need the job. Rent, groceries, car payment. My side hustle wasn't paying for all that yet. I kept my head down, endured the snickers, and told myself it didn't matter what they thought. But it did matter. Every time someone mocked me, it lit a slow-burning ember in my chest, and I'd replay their words at night while I was melting wax and blending scents. Their voices became part of the rhythm. Melt, stir, pour, mockery, cool, package, laughter. One Friday afternoon, it got worse. I had just received a notification on my phone, another wholesale order, my biggest yet, and I couldn't help but smile. Melissa noticed. "Ooh, must be another candle emergency," she said, rolling her eyes. "Do they really need you to rescue them with vanilla lavender?" The office burst out laughing again. I glanced at the clock. 2 more hours until I could go home. 2 more hours until I could lock my apartment door, light one of my own candles, and drown out their voices with the quiet satisfaction of knowing something they didn't. My little hobby was starting to make real money. But in that moment, with their laughter echoing in my ears, I made a silent promise. One day, they'll choke on those laughs. I didn't know exactly how it would happen yet, but I knew this. My hustle was going to grow, and when it did, the people who mocked me wouldn't just eat their words. They'd be knocking on my door, desperate for the same opportunity they once ridiculed. And when that day came, I'd be ready. The truth was, I never planned to start a candle business. It began as therapy. After my breakup with Daniel, a 5-year relationship ending in him calling me unambitious, I needed something to keep my hands and mind busy. I'd always loved the way certain scents could change a mood, so I bought a small candle-making kit online. My first batch was a disaster. Wax everywhere, wicks crooked, scents clashing like bad perfume. But for the first time in months, I felt lighter. By the 3rd batch, I was hooked. I stayed up late experimenting with blends, cinnamon and cedarwood for winter warmth, eucalyptus and mint for clarity, lavender and bergamot for calming nights. I posted a few pictures on Instagram, and to my surprise, friends started asking if they could buy some. That's when I opened a small Etsy shop. Sales trickled in at first, 5 orders in a week, then 10. It wasn't much, but each one felt like a tiny victory. I started documenting my process online, and strangers began following. Then came my first wholesale request from a small gift store in another city. I remember boxing up that order at 1 a.m., exhausted but giddy. Meanwhile, at my day job, things were stagnant. I worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing agency. My boss, Greg, was more interested in long lunches than actual leadership. The office culture revolved around gossip, cliques, and passive-aggressive competition. Melissa, who had been there the longest, ruled our floor like a petty monarch. She was the type to accidentally CC the entire office on an email correcting someone's mistake. She thrived on being the loudest voice in the room and loved picking targets, people who wouldn't fight back. Unfortunately, I'd become one of her favorites. My side hustle was low-hanging fruit for her and her little circle. The way they saw it, if you weren't grinding for a corporate pro, motion, you weren't worth taking seriously. I tried keeping my candle business under wraps, but in a moment of misplaced trust, I mentioned it to a coworker over lunch. A week later, Melissa just happened to bring it up during a meeting, making a joke about Emma's arts and crafts corner. After that, the teasing never stopped. Still, I refused to quit. My evenings were a blur of melting, pouring, labeling, and packaging. I spent weekends at craft fairs and pop-up markets. I taught myself product photography, learned how to manage inventory, and negotiated with suppliers. Every dollar I made went back into the business. Better wax, stronger scents, sturdier jars. The orders grew. I started seeing repeat customers and my Etsy reviews were glowing. Yet at work, none of it mattered. In their eyes, I was still the candle girl. Sometimes I'd catch myself daydreaming during dull meetings, imagining my business big enough to let me walk out of that office for good. But reality would always intrude. Rent was due, bills piled up, and my savings were thin. Then came an email that would change everything. It was from a well-known lifestyle influencer who had stumbled across my shop. She wanted to feature my candles in her small business favorites video. Her following? Over 1 million subscribers. I read that email 3 times before it sank in. I didn't know it yet, but that message was the first domino. And once it tipped, there'd be no stopping what came next. The influencer's video went live on a Thursday morning. I was in the office, half listening to Melissa complain about her latte being too foamy, when my phone started buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Then I opened my Etsy app and froze. Orders. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. My inbox lit up with messages from new customers, wholesale inquiries, even collaboration offers. By lunchtime, I'd sold more candles than I usually did in 3 months. I kept my head down, trying to suppress the smile tugging at my lips. But Melissa noticed. "What's with the smug face? Did you finally sell one of your vanilla candles to someone outside your mom's book club?" Her little entourage laughed. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Actually, business is good." "Oh?" She raised a brow. "Good as in you can afford a second-hand Keurig for your kitchen?" More laughter. I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because the truth would have been wasted on them. That day's sales alone had already eclipsed my monthly salary here. And yet, their jabs still stung. Not because they were true, but because they reminded me of every time I'd been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like I didn't belong. Over the next week, the orders kept rolling in. I spent my evenings up to my elbows in wax and packing peanuts, working until my back ached and my fingers cramped. My apartment smelled like a candle shop exploded, but I loved it. At work, the teasing shifted. It wasn't just Emma's Arts and Crafts Corner anymore. Now it was Candle CEO or Madam Wax. The tone was still mocking, but I caught flickers of curiosity in their eyes. One afternoon, Brian wandered over to my desk. "So, how much does one of those key candles go for?" "Depends on the size," I said, not looking up from my spreadsheet. He scratched the back of his neck. "Huh. You ever think about, making it a full-time thing?" I met his gaze. "Every day." Melissa overheard and scoffed. "Oh, please. You think pouring wax in your pajamas is a career move?" She leaned against my desk, lowering her voice just enough for her words to sting. "This is the real world, Emma. Your little side gig will fizzle out once people move on to the next trend." Her perfume was suffocating. I forced a polite smile. "We'll see." Inside, though, I was boiling. I wanted to prove her wrong more than anything. Not just for me, but for every person who'd been laughed at for daring to dream outside the corporate box. Then, like fate had a sense of humor, Greg called an all-hands meeting the following Monday. He stood at the front of the conference room, his tie crooked, voice unusually grave. "As you all know, the company's been facing challenges," he began. "I'm afraid we're going to have to make some cuts." A ripple of unease swept the room. Melissa's smirk faltered. I sat very still, my mind spinning. I didn't know it yet, but the next few weeks would bring layoffs, desperation, and the moment I'd been waiting for. Because soon, the same people who'd laughed at me would be lining up at my door. The layoffs came fast. 2 weeks after Greg's announcement, the first wave hit. Entire teams were called into conference rooms and emerged with cardboard boxes. By Friday, 12 desks sat empty. Monday brought another round. Melissa kept her usual sharp tone, but I noticed the tightness around her eyes. The gossip that once fueled her had been replaced by whispers of who's next. Meanwhile, my business was no longer just a side hustle. It was a full-blown operation. The influencer feature had snowballed into more press. A popular home decor blog reached out for an interview, and a regional magazine asked to feature me in their Women Entrepreneurs issue. My follower count was climbing by the thousands. I hired a local teenager part-time to help with packing orders because I couldn't keep up on my own. At the office, I kept quiet. My candle empire was my secret weapon. The more uncertain things became at work, the more I realized I was no longer afraid. I had something they didn't, a safety net I'd built with my own hands. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, Greg's voice came over the intercom. "Can I see Melissa and Brian in my office?" Everyone froze. 30 minutes later, they walked out holding boxes. Melissa's face was pale, her jaw tight. Brian wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I didn't gloat, not outwardly. But inside, something shifted. This was the moment I'd imagined in my darkest nights, when their laughter had been the loudest. Over the next week, more layoffs followed. The break room was quieter, the air heavy with tension. I overheard whispered conversations about mortgage payments, rent, and job applications going unanswered. And then it happened. I was boxing you. Some product samples in my apartment one evening when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my heart skip. Melissa. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Emma. Hey. I was wondering if you're hiring for your candle thing." For a split second, I almost laughed, but I kept my voice steady. "You mean my company?" There was a pause. "Yeah, your company." I glanced at the rows of finished candles lined up on my dining table, the scent of cedar and vanilla filling the room. "I'm not looking for anyone right now," I said, "but I'll keep you in mind." She tried to sound casual. "It's just, things are really tight right now. If you hear of anything..." "I'll let you know," I said, and hung up. The next day, Brian sent me a LinkedIn message. Same request, same answer. It was surreal. The very people who had mocked me for months now asking for help. And I knew this was only the beginning. My orders were still climbing, my brand was gaining recognition, and my calendar was filling with opportunities. For the first time, the balance of power wasn't just shifting, it was mine. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make. Something that would make sure they never forgot the girl with the little trinkets. 2 weeks later, I booked a private room at Bella Luna, the nicest restaurant in the city. The kind of place with white tablecloths, gold-rimmed plates, and a month-long wait list. It wasn't for a date or even a celebration dinner with friends. This was business. I'd just signed my largest wholesale deal yet. A national home decor chain had agreed to carry my candles in all 50 of their stores. The order was so big, I'd have to rent a small warehouse and hire full-time staff. And I wanted my first hires to remember exactly who they were working for. I sent out the invitations with a sleek a said card, Emma Harper Company. Staff, welcome dinner. When the evening came, I sat at the head of the long table, the room glowing with candles from my own line. As the servers poured wine, the door opened, and in walked Melissa, followed by Brian and 2 others who'd been part of the break room mockery crew. They'd been the first to apply when I'd posted the job listings a week earlier. They froze when they saw me. Melissa's eyes darted to the company logo embroidered on the menu cards. You're the CEO?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "I thought you knew. Welcome to Emma Harper Company." Brian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "So, what exactly will we be doing?" "Packaging, fulfillment, and customer service to start," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's a lot of work and it's not glamorous, but it's steady pay and benefits. I know times are tough." Melissa's cheeks flushed. She nodded stiffly. The rest of the evening was polite but tense. They tried to make small talk, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes. Every time a candle flickered in the centerpieces, it felt like a quiet reminder. The thing they once laughed at was now the reason they had jobs. The next morning was their first day. I'd set up the warehouse with rows of shelves, each stocked with labeled jars, shipping boxes, and rolls of branded tape. I gave them a tour, explaining the process from start to finish. Melissa tried to act engaged, but I caught her staring at a stack of vanilla lavender candles, the exact scent she'd once mocked, with a look she couldn't quite hide. By lunchtime, they were taping boxes and printing shipping labels under my instructions. The roles had reversed completely. I was the one delegating, setting deadlines, and signing their paychecks. The satisfaction wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, steady, like the slow burn of one of my own candles. Every time I saw Melissa carefully packing an order, I thought about the break room laughter, the jabs, the humiliation, and every time I felt that ember in my chest glow a little brighter. A month later, my candles hit the shelves nationwide. Sales doubled again. I gave my new employees a small raise, partly because they'd earned it, partly because I wanted them to understand something. I wasn't just their boss. I was the proof that underestimation can be a dangerous mistake. They still never apologized, but they didn't have to. I had something better than an apology. I had their respect and their paychecks in my hands. Some nights, after the warehouse closed and the hum of the day finally quieted, I'd stay behind. I'd walk the aisles between the shelves, running my fingers over the rows of jars. Hundreds of them, each one a small victory. The air was thick with the mingled scents of cedar, lavender, and citrus. It felt like breathing in everything I'd fought for. I'd think about that first batch of lopsided candles in my cramped kitchen, the mess on the counter, the cheap wicks that wouldn't stay straight. I'd think about Melissa's smirk, Brian's chuckle, the echo of that break room laughter. And I'd think about the promises I'd made to myself, to keep going, no matter how small the orders were, no matter how sharp the mockery cut. The truth is, revenge wasn't the biggest reward. It wasn't about humiliating them or making them grovel. That had been satisfying, yes. Watching their eyes when they realized they worked for me will always be one of my favorite memories. But it wasn't what drove me anymore. What drove me was freedom. I didn't have to glance over my shoulder during layoffs, wondering if my name was next on the list. I didn't have to sit in endless meetings that drained the life out of me. My paycheck didn't come from a company that saw me as replaceable. It came from my own hands, my own ideas. But still, there was a certain poetry in the way things had unfolded. Melissa had become one of my most efficient packers. She didn't speak much, but she got orders out faster than anyone else. Brian handled customer service emails now. His tone was endlessly polite, even with the most difficult buyers. I paid them both fairly, and I treated them with the respect they'd never given me. Some might call that soft. I call it control. Because real power isn't just making your enemies kneel, it's deciding whether to offer them a hand when they're already on the ground. One Friday afternoon, I caught Melissa in the warehouse after everyone else had left. She was standing by the work table holding a candle from our new autumn line, cinnamon, apple, and clove. "This is good," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Thanks," I replied. She didn't look at me, but I saw her nod before setting the jar back down and walking away. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest she would ever come. And I realized I didn't need the words anymore. The look in her eyes that day said everything. She saw me now, not as a punchline, not as the candle girl, but as someone who'd built something real, something lasting. That was enough. A year later, I signed the lease on a bigger warehouse. My candles were in over 200 stores, and we'd expanded into diffusers and room sprays. I brought on more staff, offered health benefits, and even started mentoring other women who wanted to turn their little hobbies into something more. Sometimes I still light one of my early, imperfect candles in my apartment. The flame flickers unevenly, the wax tunneled from my beginner's mistakes. But I keep it as a reminder of where I started, of the laughter I endured, and of the quiet fire that kept me going. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't their downfall. It was my rise.